Matthew. Cheers.
Cheers.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Did you guess what it is yet?
I think it's Sancerre, but you said you were not.
Yeah, I'm not. We'll reveal later. I was just giving you a hard time.
Yeah.
I'm excited to have you here. Let's see. There's a few things that I want to touch on, but just to kind of bring everybody that's listening up to speed. You and I first knew each other when I started buying wine at Ozumo. You were selling wine to Boulevard. John Lancaster put me in touch with you because I was trying to buy some Skylark wines. And then I started to really fall in love with the Springboard portfolio. You have some great wines, and you're a good rep. You don't.
I try.
You're not pushy. You're not.
They might like me a little better if I was a little more pushy.
Super aggressive. Well, that's what they always want, right? They're like, "Are you gonna close?" It's like, yeah. Sometimes, yeah, whenever I feel like it. I'm just planting seeds, I'll harvest when it's season, And let's see. So you've been with Springboard now for...
It's been over a decade.
Holy shit.
Frankly, I've lost track if it's 11, 12, or 13 years. I don't really remember, but it's been split up in a couple of different territories. So I was Marin, Sonoma, and Mendocino for... like 3-4-ish years when I first started with Springboard. And then I've been in San Francisco along with a couple of other reps as well for the last, 5 or 6 years or whatever it's been. And obviously the pandemic has altered some of what that looks like. Yes. But ultimately, San Francisco for a while now.
And then before that, maybe just bring us up to speed kind of on things like where did your journey with wine begin and kind of like how did you get to Springboard?
Yeah. I'll make it as short and a few details, but...
Doesn't have to be.
Yeah. Grew up East Coast, Vermont. Family is still there. Went to college with aspirations of being in the music industry and thought that I would be a tour manager or something of that nature. Went to the University of Hartford for 1 year and then didn't fit for me very well, so then I transferred to Syracuse. And when I went to Syracuse, I minored in the music industry and needed a major, so I picked sociology. And during this course of time, they had a couple of electives like wine and spirits appreciation. I took the elective. It was like pass-fail. Everybody in Syracuse took it pass-fail. Cool. It was like... that was the pass-fail class. You're allowed one a year or whatever, and everybody who hit the age limit could take it, and everybody took it pass-fail.
Yeah.
So I took it pass-fail. It was cool. I kind of was getting into it beyond just the drinking, Keystone Lights at the college parties. And I also had a job. It was an internship at a jazz bar in downtown Syracuse. And I would go and deal with setting up the XLR cables and making sure the mics were good and all the audio stuff. That was kind of part of my thing. And the owner was cool. He'd be like, "No, try this whiskey, try this. And then oh, things taste different." And he's like, "Well, yeah, because of X, Y, and Z." And you start to kind of put that together about different things taste different from different places. Finished school, went home, didn't want to be an academic. And living with the parents, doing the ski bum job at the local mountain. Got a job at a fried seafood restaurant that if you're thinking Long John Silver's and what's the movie? Waiting. If anybody's seen the movie Waiting, it was basically like a shittier version of Waiting in a Long John Silver kind of environment.
Cool. Okay.
No, it was not cool. It was really not fun. It was atrocious, but I learned a lot. I was frying food 1 minute, making Manhattans the next minute, and then running all the food out because the line cooks couldn't handle it. And anyway, I did that for a little while. It was a very corporate thing. And then I pivoted to another restaurant in Rutland, Vermont, and it was chef-owned. And it was like a legit spot. I mean, everything was kind of made from scratch and quality proteins, quality cocktails. It was and this was 20-something years ago, and it was one of the most, if not the most authentic restaurant that I think downtown Rutland had seen to that point. It was great. It was great to work there, and I learned quickly how much I didn't know. But I also learned that the chef was like, "You're into wine?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm kind of like I like to drink." And he's like, "Well, come sit in on a tasting." I'm like, "Okay, cool." So I sat in on a tasting. I'm like, "Oh, this is kind of fun." And the sales rep would come in, and I started to know who the local sales rep was, and would taste with him and the chef a few times, and they kind of invited me into that club a little bit. And I remember trying to serve my first bottle of wine. It was like an Argentinian Malbec, like some probably garbage wine, but I remember not really knowing how to do it tableside. And I still remember, like, I put it on my belt, and like I was twisting it, and the wine opener and the foil, like it was just a very awkward kind of thing.
Yeah.
And poured it for the table, and they loved it, and that was fine. But I realized, like, I should know what I'm doing.
Gotta practice.
I got to practice it, yeah. So I kind of started to go down the rabbit hole and spent a lot of time kind of learning and tasting with them. And I'm not going to say that I was like actively picking up the differences between all of the varietals, but it was a fun thing. And I got tangled up with a guy through the restaurant who was growing grapes in Vermont. So he planted some of the first commercially viable vineyards for hybrid varietals from the University of Minnesota. Wow. St. Croix, Frontenac, La Crescent, some of these grapes that most of your listeners probably have never heard of.
Easy sell.
Yeah. Ironically, it was. He needed somebody to sell at the local farmer's market. So I would go to the farmer's market, and it was, all the moms and dads of the kids I went to school with, small town Vermont. They would come by like, "Oh, Matt, good to see you. What are you doing?" Like, "Oh, I'm pimping rosé right now.
Yeah.
Like, you should try some." So the wines were not great, but they were local and filled with love. La Crescent has some legs if you're in the East Coast. La Crescent's a varietal. It's kind of like Riesling, and it's got a little traction. But so I did that, and then I had a buddy who was living in Germany, going to work and doing his thing. And the guy I was slinging wine for in Vermont, I was like, "Hey man, I'm gonna take a week and a half. I'm gonna go see my buddy." He's like, "Oh, you're going to Germany? You should go to the Mosel Valley." I was like, "Oh, okay, what's that?" He's like, "Well, where are you going?" I'm like, "Well, we're going to Oktoberfest, and then we're gonna go to Amsterdam." He's like, "You just hit the Mosel Valley. It's right on the way." So we did that, and almost immediately I just fell in love. I was like, "This is amazing." It was my first time in any kind of wine region, and if anybody's been to the Mosel, they know how special it is. I just fell in love with it immediately, and as soon as we got back from the trip, I was like, "Nope, I'm going to figure out wine. I'm going to figure this out." So I found a school in San Jose. It was taught by David Glancy, and Alan Murray would fill in from time to time. Catherine Fallis, a couple of other MSs would kind of like pop in. But it was a school, basically. And for about 4 or 5 months, it was, every day, Monday through Friday, 5 hours a day, you would show up and learn about wine.
Wow.
And I signed up for it. It was like October, November when I got back from Germany, and I like quit my jobs, dumped my girlfriend, signed up for this school, literally mailed a check to a guy in San Jose. He mailed me a key back. Like, that's how bonkers it was. And drove out and, went to wine school and did that for 4 months, passed my certified, and was living with a buddy in Vacaville after that, and got a job at a retail shop in Sausalito. Bacchus and Venus, great shop.
Still there?
Still there.
Yep.
Still there. A couple of different owner now from when I was there originally, but I still sell wine to Bacchus and Venus, so it's kind of fun to go in and be like, I was here, 13, 14 years ago, like behind the counter. But I worked there for about 2 years, and during that time, I got to meet a bunch of brokers, distributors, all the people that come in selling wine, and got to become friendly with Elizabeth Corsini, one of the owners of Springboard, and it just kind of evolved to like, "Hey, we need somebody to help us sell some wine." I'm like, "Well, okay,
I'll try that.
Yeah, and that's really how I ended up with Springboard. And again, that was 12, 13, 14 years ago, whatever it's been, and the portfolio has changed immensely during that time. Brands have come, brands have gone. We've had different focuses throughout this entire period. But yeah, I'm still there. I like it. It's a great company, and I enjoy working with the sisters. And yeah, so that's kind of how I got into it, and here I am.
That's awesome. What a journey, you know? I mean, from the East Coast to the West, from music to wine. I mean, it's fascinating. And then also like your jumping off point kind of is like the Mosel Valley. That's got to be, yeah. I have yet to been, but incredibly striking vineyard sites.
I've been lucky enough to go back 2 times now with different wine trips focused, and it's still as magical to me as the first time I saw it. You know,
so
and
cool.
Yeah, I would go back in a heartbeat. Like it is probably my favorite wine region that I have visited, and I've been to a few, not like a ton, but I've definitely been to a few, and I would pick the Mosel over any of them.
Yeah, yeah. So you know, also. The wines are pretty good.
The wines.
They've been making wine for a little while.
Yeah, no, they got some good stuff.
Yeah, they've adapted. So there's a few things that I want to kind of try to like dissect from your kind of journey. So the winery that you're working for, is the winery still around?
Oh, in Vermont, you mean?
Yeah.
To my knowledge, no.
Okay.
To my knowledge, no. The wine industry in Vermont is kind of it's been a lot of upheaval over the past 15 years or so. I don't believe that the winery still exists. I'm not sure if the vineyards are still there. He might be selling the fruit off. I kind of feel like that's probably the direction he was going to go in.
Yeah.
But I honestly haven't spoken to the guy for a while, and I feel a little bad about that. But
well, this is your reminder to reach out to people that you love.
I still have a bottle actually. I brought it all the way from Vermont. I still have a bottle of the Le Crescent. Like it's in my wine cellar stash.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's great.
I mean, it's like basically brown now, you know. But
it's sentimental.
It is sentimental.
I have when Glazers and Southern merged. I still have a bottle of the year 1 SGWS red blend. And it has like their label on it and everything. And a couple of my friends drank it and they were like, "This wine is shit." And I was like, "I'm not even gonna open it. It's just cool. Like whatever. I don't care. You know." So Virginia as a wine growing region is one of the older AVAs, if I'm not mistaken. Well, they've been making wine there for quite a long time. But when you were there, I mean, it was mostly farmers market sales. So he wasn't probably doing a lot of like.
Virginia's a little further south than where I was. Vermont is where I was.
Oh, I'm sorry, Vermont. Jesus, yeah. Virginia is old. So how long have they been making wine in Vermont for?
Not long. Right. I mean, the hybrid varietals are really kind of the push there. And I'm sure that there's been some people trying to make it work for a while, but there hasn't been really any commercial kind of sense of that. There are a few producers now. Garage East is kind of one of the kind of hot, sexy producers out of Vermont, and they're doing a lot of natural wines. And my mom sends me updates regularly from different wine producers in Vermont.
Yeah.
So I do know that there's a few things kind of percolating there that were not happening 15 years ago, even 20 years ago when I was there. Obviously global warming is a thing, and humidity is a factor in New England, but beyond the humidity, the cold temperatures too. So if a few degrees warmer, maybe a few more vines survive, who knows? It might get a little better, but right now I think it's pretty much left to the kind of natural and wild fermentations.
Right. I mean, it's pretty cool, and that's was going to be one of my next questions. Is do you think that it's mostly attributed to global warming, or just kind of like overall more experience, more people working the land, kind of like?
I think that it's probably a combination of both. Honestly.
Yeah.
I think that as the wine industry and the internet has kind of blossomed over the last literally 20 years or so. You have more and more people who have the idea of this idyllic farming, kind of making something from nature and all of that. And that is very much a Vermont ethos. Farming is very ingrained to the culture there. So it just makes sense to me that people would want to go there and try and make it happen.
Yeah.
And they have probably different sets of challenges than obviously people here in California or any other parts of the world. But they're going to try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. I'm excited. I'll look forward to trying to find some of these wines. Is there anywhere, have you seen Garage East anywhere in San Francisco at all?
There's been a couple of places. There is a book that brings them in. Maybe Revel, maybe.
Okay.
But they are, occasionally, they do pop up in some restaurants around San Francisco. I've been to a couple of like tastings, like flights of unique natural wines.
Yeah.
And they've popped up on there a few times.
Okay.
So they're around. They're around.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very exciting. And then kind of going back into music, was there anything in particular that spoke to you? Was there an instrument that kind of drew you in? I mean, what kind of like
I mean,
everything?
Everybody, like, I wanted to be
lifestyle.
a guitar, or, like, I wanted to
Sure.
be a rock and roll guy.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, everybody wanted to do that.
Yeah.
Drums, I started on for, like, a hot minute and then switched to guitar, but I realized the stage fright was too much to kind of overcome, so I preferred to be more on, like, the management, setting up, booking side
Sure.
of things.
Yeah.
That was kind of where I thought I was going to head. But.
And then do you ever kind of like, when you think about, since music's quite foundational, when you taste wine or when you think about wine nowadays, does a lot of your brain still kind of like associate it with music, or you've been in the wine industry long enough now that maybe
I don't think so.
it's easier to compartmentalize it?
No, I don't think there's maybe a romantic or like an altruistic idea that wine and music are connected. And of course, I will not argue with you. Yes, I believe that that is true. But the similarities for me are much more on the business side of things.
Okay.
The wine industry and the music industry are not so dissimilar.
Mm-hmm.
At least in my limited knowledge of the music industry.
Sure.
But there are a lot of similarities. You're dealing with a product, whether it's wine or music, and there's marketing behind it and placements and positioning and things that are authentic and things that are not authentic. And you can, pick and choose and navigate however you want to through that. But there's ironically a lot of similarities between the two.
Yeah.
At least on the business side. And you can, again, say the art expression, but yeah.
We see a lot of music people, I think, kind of like get into wine. I mean, I'm just like looking at a shelf right now and I think about like, Jeff Smith from Hourglass is super into music also. And then who was it? The guy from Tool has his winery in
Maynard,
in New Mexico.
Yeah. Arizona.
Arizona.
I think,
yeah. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of Gruet, the sparkling wine from New Mexico. Or Gruet. I don't know how to say it. And then, now you've been in the Bay Area for 13, 14 years, 15 years.
A few minutes, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's been an incredible evolution, I'm sure, just in the last 15 years of like openings, closings, trends, things like that. How are you feeling about this? I don't even like to call the natural wine thing a trend anymore, because it's not really. It's just kind of like its own market share. But I guess the more concerning trend is the non-drinking trend. How are you feeling about some of these things lately? Do you feel like they're kind of a little bit more of a fad, or people that are listening to this are probably drinkers mostly, so you're not going to offend.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
For the people that are not drinking, I ask why. You should absolutely indulge and enjoy yourself. Human beings have been doing it for centuries. Like before any of this fancy wine or fancy beer, like fermented things, monkeys are eating them out of trees. Like everybody's looking for a way to alter their consciousness in some way or another. So drink up.
Yeah.
You youngsters, drink up.
Please.
Keep us in business.
Please help us.
The natural wine thing, I mean, I think it's here to stay.
Yeah.
And I think that, there are producers that were doing quote unquote natural wine before it was cool. And everybody likes to talk about their brand as like, oh, we were doing it before it was cool. And, like, sure. I'm much more like natural wine are farmers who manage their property and they farm with the seasons, no pesticides, like all that kind of stuff, natural fermentations, no sulfur, maybe a touch of sulfur, like very very kind of farmer oriented,
right.
What I am less excited about are, the people who get a ton of grapes and then put it in a tank in their basement, and now we have a juice in a bottle. And I think that over time that will kind of dissipate,
sort itself out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that, the authentic producers and the real farmers will kind of come back to the top. They were there in the first place, and then I think the market got flooded with people who were trying to do different things, and that's great. Everybody needs to try different things and experiment and innovate, but I think we'll see a pendulum swing kind of back the other way in a few years, maybe.
I think you're right. I mean, I think it's less about it being a natural wine and more about it being like conscientious
Yeah.
farming,
Yeah.
And winemaking, right? I was just in Spain, and I was in a vineyard, right on the Ebro River, and I was standing there, and the vineyard manager was there, and I was like, "Hey, all your leaves are red." He was like, "Yep." I was like, "Is that viral?" And he's like, "Yep." And I was like, "And all your American rootstock is like shooting all over the place. Like, is that an issue?" He's like, "Yep." And I was like, "There's a big dead patches in your vineyard." And he's like, "Uh-huh." And I was like, "What are you doing here in this vineyard?" He's like, "Well, once a year, the mustard flowers get really tall and the bugs get really bad." And there was bugs everywhere. And the bugs get really bad. So I just go down with a tractor through the rows. I go, "Once a year." And he goes, "Yeah." I go, "What else?" He's like, "That's it." I'm like, how the fuck is that not natural wine? Like, I know that a lot of stuff is lost in like, the winemaking side of things, like naturally made wine. But I'm like, this is very much a natural vineyard. Like, it's just raw. I mean, we were sitting there and I'm like, how is this thing even fucking alive? But it's, 140-year-old dry farm Tempranillo, right? So it's like, that's how. It's a tree at this point.
Yeah, and he can be profitable enough to keep doing it.
Yeah.
And that's the main thing, too.
Yeah,
because you can be natural and organic farming, and then if you really want to be super careful, the prices are going to go way up on things.
Yeah,
and having a sort of laissez-faire approach to natural farming, I think, is a much more... and I kind of hate that term with Sanse or whatever, but like I think that's a much more realistic approach to farming. There's a great book called One Straw Revolution. It's about kind of like a bunch of hippie commune guys who grow rice, and it was kind of like a manifesto back in the day in the 60s, 50s, 60s about how to spend less time actively managing the rice paddy or the crops, basically, and let nature kind of do its thing. Like, nature will balance itself out.
Great.
And I think that's true with wine to a certain extent, and vineyards. Like, if you let them do their thing and don't try to over manage it, they'll be okay. You might have a few ups and downs, but I think that's a much more quote unquote natural kind of approach to winemaking.
Right.
Or wine growing.
And the non-drinkers, I think.
Yeah. They'll come around eventually.
I hope so. I mean, here's my thing. I'm always like, it's catch-22, right? I go like, if you're not drinking because you have problems, I respect that.
Yeah.
You have every right to decide that. If you're not drinking because it's this virtue signaling or whatever, like, look at me, I'm superior, I don't drink, then I think that they will come around, or I hope that they will come around. At least just be open-minded to the idea of change. Like, I'm never closed-minded to the idea that I might not drink one day, right? Yeah. Like, it's not something I'm actively thinking about, but if anybody was like, "Hey, do you think you'll ever be sober?" I'm like, who knows? Who knows what the future holds?
Yeah.
I mean, right now, I don't really have any intention of that. It's actually October, so this is all non-alcoholic wine we're drinking, by the way.
Of course. Why October? Oh, Sober October.
Sober October.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I can't keep track of
it. Yeah, it's okay. Dry January, Sober October, whatever.
When is the guy supposed to drink anyway? There's like fewer and fewer months, it seems.
Yeah, between the hours of 6 a.m. and 5:59 a.m. So, yeah, I mean, I think we'll see what the market holds, but I also think that we're in this really kind of weird positioning with the election and things like that. They're kind of like, it's always a challenge. I hear it's always a challenging year. As somebody who's been here longer, maybe you can contest otherwise. Because in the Texas market, election years didn't really affect the market at all. But we're oil money, so maybe it's a
Yeah.
little bit different because it's a little less regulated.
Yeah, I don't have a good gauge on that,
Sure.
to be honest, because, I mean, realistically, we have this election now. The last one was in 2020.
Right.
And the one prior to that was,
Yeah, and 2020 is
4
hard.
years prior. And I was a little less aware of kind of, market trends and things at that
Sure.
point. But what I can say is that people always drink in an election year. They just drink to celebrate, or they drink because they're sad, basically.
Yeah.
On the sales side of things, which you can appreciate too, like I do talk to a few accounts who have been like, yeah, we're kind of holding back on some buying because we want to see how the election pans out.
Yep.
Because we don't know, what's going to happen and how that might affect our purchasing power, et
Right.
cetera, in the next, 6 months, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So they're already kind of managing their cellar and trying to budget and plan around some of that stuff. I will be drinking some fancy champagne on election night, and regardless of who wins or loses,
right.
it's just, yeah,
Well, that's the old adage, right? Champagne is there for you when you
victory or defeat.
For victory or defeat. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think another thing that's kind of driving away some business, or at least driving away some market share, is just kind of the inaccessibility of the price points. A lot of these wines, I mean, we were talking about this before the podcast too. A lot of like quintessential staple brands have kind of priced themselves out of like daily drinking. And I mean, if you think about the number of bottles are sold in a restaurant of a wine by the glass versus a wine by the bottle, I mean, probably, it depends on the concept, obviously, but, probably 60% to 70% of all the wine sold in a lot of places is BTG. So when you're only a by the bottle wine, I mean, you're competing in that already minimal sales category. And there's so many great brands now. There's so many great books, and there's so much access to everything, not to mention all the access through gray market as well, right?
Yeah.
I would buy stuff through Atherton when I was at Ozumo because it was just like, I don't have time to track down a different distributor for everything. And this stuff has good provenance. I'll just buy it through them, I mean, I even bought wines from Chambers through a gray market channel because post-pandemic there's only one rep, so I didn't really have a rep. But it was something that I was just like, oh, I could either, spend a bunch of money with this person to try to get an allocation, or I could just buy this wine for slightly higher. Like, I'll just buy the wine, So, I don't know. I mean, I think it's cool. You represent like a really fun book that seems like it changes, like not aggressively, but you kind of gain producers quite often. Are there younger, kind of like newer hip producers that you're excited about? Maybe not just in your portfolio, but in general.
I mean, there's
I should say affordable too.
yeah, affordable. I mean, I'll do the plug for a couple of our local guys, but like Ryan Sturm, the Sturm wines, Los Chichoques, Graham Tatomer. We do have some cool, fun, like affordable kind of wines that are, I think are fun, and compelling. And obviously we have kind of like bigger Napa Cabernets too, and like name brand kind of stuff. And everybody has their place. And it's kind of a blessing and a curse, honestly, when you're talking about a portfolio, because like I can walk into a fancy steakhouse and try and sell them a few things in the book, and then I can walk into a natty wine bar and try and sell them a few things in the book, but I don't necessarily fit in each particular spot 100%, So you can kind of do a little bit with everybody. Again, blessing and curse. I think that there are a few producers that are kind of cool and upcoming, and I certainly like to support them. But I don't know. It's such a hard, like, there's so much competition, and everybody knows somebody who's making like 50 cases of this, 100 cases of that. And it's like, try and be everywhere at once. And even the wines that we don't sell, it's a tight market out there. And I don't know. Do you have specific brands that you're like super into right now? Like small production stuff that's new and like popping up? Like,
I mean, there's a lot.
Yeah,
right?
and it's kind of too many. And like I love the idea of
when you turned the
like
question on me, I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's like a little brain melt because and those are the people I like to support, right? Like if I go to, a wine bar in San Francisco that's like, hey, we got this new producer. She used to work here. She's making her own wines now. Right. And like, that's so cool. I'm going to buy her wine. You know what I mean? And that's fantastic. And I love that. And I want more of that.
Right.
Whether it's in my book or somebody else's, whatever it is. But
kind of like support local.
Yeah. And local means hyper local. Like the person used to work at this wine bar for like 2 or 3 years, and now she's like going up, stomping on grapes, and making her own wines. And like it's her second vintage. She's got like a slightly skin contact rosé or whatever. And like, I'm gonna buy it.
Yeah.
Like of course I am. I don't care if it's affordable or not affordable.
Right.
I'm gonna buy it.
Yeah. I've always loved to see that. Like I'll look in Instagram stories and I'll see like some of our local somms like going up and like helping with winemaking or like helping with harvest or things like that. And I'm always like, I wonder if they're the next ones. Like maybe not, right? Maybe they decide they want to stay on the on-premise or retail side of things for the rest of their lives. But like, what's it take to make a jump to that side of things? And like, it would be really cool to kind of like, I've only been in San Francisco for 6 years, and I think it's going to be really amazing to continue to watch the evolution of so many people that we work with, because we work with a lot of cool people.
Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, there's so many things that are popping up left and right now. I mean, one of our friends actually in the building makes wines from the Rogue Valley in Oregon. And, it's so interesting. I mean, like, he lives here. He makes wines there, or the woman from Ernest Winery. Why am I spacing on her name? Anyways,
up in Healdsburg.
The winery is in Healdsburg, but she lives here in Noe Valley.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I just tasted. I was at the tasting room the other day, literally in Healdsburg. I mean, this is a plug for Ernest, I guess. I was digging all the wines. They've got like a Petit Arvine from like Alder Springs. They had like an Aligoté. Like they had some cool stuff. Like the wines were tight.
Yeah,
I was digging it.
That was my link back to some of the smaller producer stuff. Like I saw in Bianca's bag today, she had a bottle of Malvasia Bianca, and I looked at the back of the bottle and it was like 160 case production. And I was like, oh shit, that's small, And then besides that, I mean, it's just kind of like, it's tough, like I love my portfolio. Mm-hmm. We don't have a ton of like really small producers or micro producers, unless you're talking about like, like Outpost Winery or something that makes like 5,000 cases, but they've been around for 35 or 40 years and they don't particularly make a style of wine that like I would drink all the time, much less could afford to drink all the time. I mean, domestic wines are...
It's tough. There was a supplier that came out recently, and she has her own import company, and she was like, hey, where do I go around the city? Like, I want to bounce around to some wine bars and like hang out and stuff. And I was like, okay, go. I listed half a dozen wine bars that I would consider to be, cool, fun places that are kind of, on the hipper side of things. Mm-hmm. And she went to all the wine bars, and afterwards she's like, Matt, where are all the domestic wines? And I'm like, well, they're kind of expensive sometimes. Not always. I know there's a lot of people watching this that are probably like, my wine's not that expensive. Like, I get it. But the overwhelming majority of California wines are a higher price point than a wine bar really wants to pour.
Right.
And of course there are exceptions, but that was kind of her. It was interesting. She's from New York, and that was kind of her take on everything, was that like, they had all these import wines. She's like, I came to California because I wanted to drink California domestic stuff. And I was like, well, I mean, you got to talk to the buyers at these wine bars, but that's the overwhelming theory, is that they're a little bit expensive. And that's just the cost of doing business in a lot of these places. It's challenging. Especially
San Francisco. I mean, that's something that we talk about a lot when we have like team meetings or general sales meetings within the company. We'll have this conversation. And, somebody will say like, oh, the wine's, $20 a bottle, so you pour it for $18 a glass. I'm like, it's not San Francisco anymore. I mean, San Francisco, wine's 18, you pour it for 20 a glass, or you pour it for 22 a glass, right? I mean, the margins are so much different. And part of it could be, the increase of food, the increase of labor, all other things, like the bucks getting passed a little bit wonky. And beverage programs have always been where people make the margin, right? Like you run like a 33% cost of sale on food, 40% cost of sale on food, but your liquor cost is 17%, right? So you make everything up on liquor so you can just afford to kind of like spread the juice, right? Yeah.
No, and you've talked about this on some of your other podcasts, and I've listened to some of it, but the cost of dining in San Francisco, the cost of operating, like it is a prohibitively sort of expensive market to a certain point, and it makes it really tough for restaurants, but for people who want to dine out. Like I love to go out. I love to go out and eat and like sit down and have a bottle of wine, be on a date, just sit at the bar, talk to the bartender. Like I enjoy that atmosphere, and I think wine tastes better in that kind of atmosphere. I've got wine open at the end of the day. I can pour myself whatever I've got open, but there's something about being in that restaurant environment where you're kind of closed off from your phone, at least you should be closed off from your phone, and you're focusing on the person in front of you or the few people in front of you, and you're sharing an experience with that bottle. Could be the same wine as the one that I sell, but it's going to taste better to me in that moment. It just, you're focused more on that and the immediate surroundings, and it's more and more challenging to have that experience. You can find restaurants with bottles that are more affordable, all of that kind of stuff, but people are dining out less. It's expensive to do it, and they're ordering fewer bottles of wine. You've talked about this before on some of the other stuff. I mean, tax, tip, SF mandates, and everything. After you add it all up, I mean, $100 bottle of wine is going to be $130, $140.
Catches you.
Yeah, and that's just a little bit of a switch,
Yeah, especially for people that aren't from the Bay Area.
Yeah.
I mean, that's this whole thing. I won't go too far into this tangent, but that's the whole thing about this new thing where you're not allowed to park close to the corner of the street. Have you heard about this?
No.
Oh, there's this thing where it's like, oh, you can't park within 10 feet of the intersection because you need room to turn or see or whatever the
it's
fuck
going to block
the
view. Yeah.
And they're like, we're not going to paint it red. We're not going to put up signs. It's like, then you can't ticket people. If you're not putting up signs, you're not painting the curb red, you can't ticket people, right? So people from here... No. I don't think they've enacted it yet. I mean, I always get tickets, but I don't think they've enacted it yet. So it's not an issue yet. But yeah, I heard about it. It's funny, you'll park sometimes down in San Francisco. There's a spot over near the ballpark actually. And I'll see a spot and I go like, okay. And I like park and I look at the sign on the meter. The sign says like, no parking from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., delivery trucks only. And you go, okay. And then you get out and you look at the other sign that says no parking from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., drop off, loading zone only. And you go, okay, it's 6:15. And then you look at the next sign and it says, no parking from 6 p.m. to 5 a.m.,
every other Tuesday of the month.
Whatever the fuck it is, And you go like, so why are these spots even here? I can't park here, kind of the unspoken rules, the unexpected added costs.
You get used to it though. Like when I first started driving around the city, dragging a bag, like I was very paranoid and like very like anxious about where I was parking and yes, I've gotten tickets. You get broken into. I mean, I kind of assume about every 6 to 8 months I'm going to have my window smashed, and I'm about due for that anytime soon now. Hopefully, it's not tonight. But after a little while, you just kind of get used to it. And like I know, for at least for me, calling on accounts, like I know where to park, like how to navigate those streets and things, and it becomes less stressful. But for people from out of town, good Lord, it's I'm trying to go to a nice restaurant to have a nice dinner, and like I'm driving here from my hotel or something. Like, good luck, buddy.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah. I fucked up one time. I had my big surgery and I was recovering from the surgery, and we went. Oh, you still have a little white in there?
Did I?
Yeah, there was a little bit.
Okay.
I fucked up. I was recovering from my surgery. It was our first meal out. And we went out, and I just was like not paying attention because we were running late. And I parked the car, And I went out, I had a nice meal, and it was good. It was a little bit more than we wanted to spend, but that's okay because it was my first time that I was going to be able to like go out and eat and drink. And I get back to the car, and I have a $450 ticket. And I'm just like, what did I do wrong?
How did you get a $450 ticket?
I parked in a handicap zone.
Oh.
And it was the spot right outside Boulevard, and it was late, right? And I got out, and the sign was like up in the tree, and the curb was blue, but I didn't look at the curb because it was like, 6:30 at night or 7 o'clock at night, and it was daylight savings, so it was dark already. And I just kind of like rolled straight in, and I'm like, oh. So yeah, I mean, you add that into the cost, and it's like all of a sudden there's
It's an expensive night out.
I always say my most expensive Irish coffee is at Buena Vista. Not because the Irish coffee is expensive, because I parked in a yellow zone and I got like a $180 ticket one time. I'm like, fuck. When I had 2 Irish coffees, I came out and I spent, $220, $240 or whatever.
So how do you find it driving around the city now that you're dragging a bag from being on the restaurant side to now dragging a bag for Chambers? Like, have you adapted to the parking? Have you kind of like, how do you find it?
I think that it's funny because I've been late everywhere for like the last 2 weeks, at least like 5 minutes. So I'll pretend like I know what I'm talking about, even though I'm still late. I think that you have to leave way earlier and you have to give yourself more time, especially now that things are getting busier and busier with, Salesforce building being back and Transamerica building being back. I mean, we were around downtown today and it was really busy. We went to the J Hotel on, 433 Clay Street or whatever.
Was that Prelude?
Yeah. Well, to the third floor and then later on Prelude. And, the normal garage I would park in under Sprezzatura, no parking. So I was running a few minutes behind, and then I got to the parking garage, and I circled for like 15 minutes inside the parking garage, and I couldn't find parking. So then I had to leave and go to another parking garage, right? But I kind of just got to the point where like I would rather spend a little bit more money to go into a parking garage where I don't have to worry about getting towed or getting a ticket, a little less likely to have break-ins and stuff like that is just worth a little bit of extra money to me.
Safety and security.
Straightforward, just like get in, get it done, and then I don't have to deal with like, I have to go replace my window today, I have to cancel appointments or, whatever. And at least today, nobody smashed my window because it's hot, so my AC got to work real good. What'd you think about the white?
I liked it. I thought it was.
You don't have to guess.
High-toned, acidic. It's the perfect thing. It's like 95 degrees in San Francisco today. It's scorching hot. It's probably the hottest day of the year. Super tasty. Again, I feel like Sauvignon Blanc or Sancerre. I think it was in that world. That's my 2 cents. But obviously, there's a lot of high acid whites. Albarino maybe. I don't know. What? Give me. What was it?
You'll hate me because
do the grand reveal.
None of those things.
Oh.
It's but it's I say this all the time. The wines are not always testable. I mean, I poured Bianca one time like an Italian Syrah, right? Griot from Sicily.
Well, shit. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
This is from.
Okay. That's fine. I get it. I see it. I get it now.
Yeah.
It's just not something that I would have thought. Yeah.
No, I mean it has this kind of like pithy, like green tea kind of characteristic to it that I really like.
Right on.
Yeah, it's from the far west in Sicily, and it's kind of in this big marsh, like sandbar thing. And yeah, like all throughout the vineyard, there's like ancient Phoenician ruins and stuff like that. It's a pretty cool little vineyard site and fun wine. We don't really get a lot of. I mean, we get like, I think 46 packs a year of it. So.
That's not many.
Not many.
Well, thank you for sharing it.
Of course, yeah.
It's great.
And I haven't yet tasted the red, but what do we have?
So I brought this when I first came to California. I was enamored with a producer called Sean Thackeray, who has since passed away. At this point, he passed away a couple of years ago, but he was a very kind of pivotal person for me in my wine education moving forward. When I was at the wine school, we tasted this bottle is Orion. We tasted an Orion. I don't remember the vintage. Might have been 2005-ish. But I just remember like scribbling on my notes, like, this is fucking amazing.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You know, stars and all the things. And fast forward, I ended up working at Bacchus and Venus, and we worked with his wines through Springboard at that point in time. And I remember, 25, didn't know shit from Shinola, and I was out in Vacaville, and he's like, "Oh yeah, come out to the vineyard, come out to the winery, like come visit me in Bolinas." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I like drove like 2 hours out to West Marin from Vacaville to go visit him in Bolinas, and it was just me. We just like hung out for like 2 or 3 hours, and like he opened some stuff, and I mean, I admittedly was like nervous and like, star-stricken or starstruck, whatever.
Yeah.
This is no joke. When I literally showed up, he was on the phone in his office, and he's like, "Hold on 1 second, I'll be there in a minute." I'm like, "Okay." And he like hung up the phone. He's like, "Oh yeah, that was Rob. And he wanted some wines to score." I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, he runs a magazine and like rates wines or something." Right. And like, he's like, "You mean Robert Parker?" He's like, yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
And he's like, he's calling you for you to send him wines. He's like, "Yeah, I don't like to do that." And he said it in a very kind of high-toned and jovial way.
Yeah.
But, and we hung out for like 2 hours, and he just like opened shit and hung out in the kitchen. We just talked, and he like showed me the barrels and everything. And I was way out of my league in terms of like just all of it. I mean, I was way over my head. And I remember at one point he gave me like a vase. I was like, "Wow, look at this thing. That's cool." And he like handed me this vase. He's like, "Yeah, hold it." I'm like, "Wow, it's heavy." He's like, "Yeah, it's like an amphora from like whatever 200 BC or something." I'm like, "What?
Why am I touching this?
Why is this on your kitchen counter, and why did you give it to me to hold?" He was a very smart person, very eccentric, and was just very pivotal in my kind of love of the wine industry. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate enough to meet him multiple times and taste through a bunch of vintages with him. And I, get to sell his wines and have sold his wines. He's passed on now, and a lot of his library and cellar stuff is gone. I have some bottles kicking around in my house. I'm like, yeah, let's open a bottle, see how it's doing. And this vineyard specifically was in St. Helena. It's like a 100-year-old vineyard. It used to go to Gallo, like way before he got the contract for it, and Gallo was paying the owners of this vineyard. It's like 1.5 acres in St. Helena, and they were paying him nothing for it.
Yeah.
And Sean was like, "I will pay you 4 times what you have, like 100-year-old vines." And they brought in some people to like test the vines, to do genetics, to see what was actually in the vineyard.
Right.
And they were like, "Yeah, it's Syrah, it's Grenache, that might be, Alicante. We don't know what the other like 30 vines are. We have no idea." And I just loved that story. I got to visit the vineyard, and the vines were tall. They're like taller than your head, and they're bush trained, just like big old vines, 100 years old, dry farmed. And he made this wine, Orion, from that vineyard, and it's always been his kind of top of the line bottling. And cool. One of the wines and producers that really made me fall in love with the wine industry. Yeah. And anybody who's interested, you can Google around. There's a great video of him on Chowhound. If you'd like type Chowhound, Sean Thackeray, there's like a great 20-minute kind of interview with him, probably 20 years ago, when he was a little more when he was in his prime, late prime. It's just one of the brands that are very near and dear to my heart. So
I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So this is, I'm assuming it's just like a field blend of all the stuff
they don't know.
Grown?
Yeah. They literally don't know. It's just the vineyard. It's just the vineyard blend. It's like 1.5 acres, and some of the vines would get old and die, and they'd replant it with a cutting from one of the other vines, but like there was never really any official classification on what the grapes were.
Right.
I believe, and I would have to double check on this, but I think I heard that they ripped up the vineyard after his passing because it was not profitable anymore. Like it was old, diseased,
weird,
small amounts of fruit.
Esoteric grapes.
It just wasn't happening anymore.
Yeah.
So my impression is that the vineyard is gone now, which is a bummer.
That is a bummer. Yeah. One of my favorite vineyards for domestic Syrah was Rogers Creek. Rogers Creek is also gone, which I think is a robbery. It's not even replanted. I think that's the thing that upsets me the most, right?
They just pulled it out and left it?
Pulled it out. I think their plan was to replant, and then I think they never replanted. I think it's just kind of like in a holding pattern right now. This wine reminds me, not really the same wine, but it puts into my brain a smaller producer that I'm excited about in our portfolio, which is Craig Harmeyer. The Harmeyer wines, he makes really cool Chenin Blancs, and he ages some under floor. It's like very garage east, and he's in the Sacramento Delta. And he has a wine, it's called Victor Weiser, and it's Macalumna Glen. It's like 52 varieties in this one plot. And they're cool. Like, if you buy it, you have to buy all of it. And then there's like so little of each thing that everybody just kind of like blends it together, dumps it together.
That's cool.
Know?
Yeah,
it's
I haven't
cool.
heard of this.
Yeah, it's cool. And I think it, I can't remember what the retail pricing is, but retail pricing is probably like, 35 at most, So it's a 52. It's like Sylvaner. It's got Riesling. It's got Gruner. It's got like all these crazy.
It's
like,
a white blend. Yeah.
White blend. Yeah. It's weird. We looked at the chart. I was like, never heard of that. Never heard of that. Never heard of that. Never heard of that. Which is always exciting because,
Yeah, of course.
Being in the game as long as we have, it's fun to just
find things you've never heard of.
Get surprised every now and then.
Yeah.
Let's see. What else? How's your year shaping up? 2023 is a sales year.
Yeah, sales year. I think the wine industry in general is in a state of upheaval, and I'm sure that other people who have been on the podcast to talk to will say the same thing.
Yeah.
We made a joke about the youngsters not drinking, and of course, nobody drank wine when they were 25 anyway, which you mentioned in the past, and I think that's absolutely true. Outside of a little bit of Ravenswood when I was in college, I don't think I really drank a lot of wine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the wine industry is in a state of upheaval. Just personally, my sales are down this year, and they were down a little bit last year.
Yep.
2022, they were pretty good. It was a rebound year coming out of the pandemic. Company-wide, I think that's relatively consistent. It depends on the kind of territory. For me, I'm in mostly San Francisco, but different parts of the state have different, metrics and rebound rates and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. I think the city is a little still depressed from the pandemic. I have seen some, I would like to say, signs of life and signs of optimism in the past couple of months, and I think that's a positive thing. So I'm optimistic for a change in the future. Prices, the cost of doing business needs to change before we see any real kind of forward momentum.
All right, and we're back.
And we're back.
We are. It's a little later. It wasn't an immediate jump back in. The camera had to cool down. We're still working out the kinks on the new lens. And
it's hot. It's hot.
We were complaining about the heat today.
Yes, it's been
exactly.
Warm.
So I'll give my camera the benefit of the doubt. Unless it dies in the next 10 or 15 minutes, then I'm going to be pissed again. But we'll get through it together. At least we have a little bit of mezcal.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers. So let's see. Where we left off was kind of the current market positioning in San Francisco. One of the things that I was going to kind of ask you about was when we're talking about these numbers, do you think, maybe this is a little bit more of a can of worms that we need to get into right now, but do you think, 2020 for retailers was, benchmark, it was the best, right? Do you feel like that's been a pretty steady trickle downward for the most part, outside of the giant online retailers?
My impression is yes.
Right.
I did not. Our company saw a big hit in retail, a big bump in retail, online retail. Of course, skyrocketed in 2020 for obvious reasons. I think that as the world opened up post-pandemic and people realized they bought cases of wine that they're not drinking as fast as they thought. That I think the online retail business has slowly kind of chunked down a little bit. I think it'll always be there. It's always going to be there.
Yeah.
But of course, I think 2020 was that high water mark for online retail.
Yeah.
I don't see it coming back to that point ever again, unless we have, another round of COVID or whatever that's that kind of significant. But yeah, it was great for retail in 2020, shitty for restaurants. Yeah, the industry I think has normalized a little bit now. I think it's a little bit more like kind of consistent to where it
like
was.
this.
Yeah, exactly.
And then now it's kind of plateauing, if you will.
Yep, I would agree.
One of the other things that you wanted to talk about was
my soapbox on rosé. We'll get on
perfect.
that. The rosé market has been pretty shitty for the last 18 months or so. We have importers that actually decided not to bring in any rosé in this year at all.
Yep.
They're just like, we're not doing it. It's done. Mm-hmm. Last year was a very poor market for rosé. I think that a lot of wine drinkers, God bless them, were drinking the chillable reds and kind of the orange wines and that kind of and. Awesome, great, keep drinking it, do your thing. But I think that it was a little bit of a fad, and people were like got into that, and they drank a bunch of it, and they're like, "Nah, I'm not sure if this is for me." And they tried a bunch of things, and I think you'll see a rebound in the rosé market in the next year or two.
Yeah.
I've already seen it a little bit this year, just in my world.
Great.
And, company wide, we've seen a little bit of a rebound, which is good.
Awesome.
I think rosé is a delicious drink that people should continue to enjoy and should not be ostracized.
Please.
Yeah.
Please drink more rosé.
Yeah, rosé is fantastic.
In Texas, we did frosé. We would just take like cheap bottles of rosé and put them in the margarita machine, and we would just frozen.
Why not?
It was fine. They were good.
When I say the importers didn't bring it in, I mean like the cheap stuff.
Yeah.
I don't even mean like the fancy like a high-end
$20,
rosé. I don't even mean
$25.
that. I mean like they actively said no to the what would be on the shelf at like $12 or $13 a bottle rosé in a liter from Spain, organic, like delicious product, and it makes sense. And they were just like, no, we're still closing out stuff from the previous vintage. Like we don't want to make this move. And I think that's smart. I think that's smart as a business decision. But I also think that wine drinkers over the past couple of years have gone into a lot more of the orange wine and chillable red category, and those are definitely categories to stay. But just like any new thing, everybody jumps in, head first, and that's all they want to do for a while, and there'll be a pullback on that. I think those things should stay, and they have merit, and they absolutely should be on wine programs. But I think you'll see a little bit more come back on the rosé market, and I don't know. That's my 2 cents on that.
I hope so. Drink more Skylark Rosé.
Skylark Rosé.
Skylark Rosé
Pink
all
belly.
day. Pink belly.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you say that. I'm curious too. Did the suppliers, maybe not importers, mention? I wonder how rosé sales are doing.
Nationally, they were down.
Okay,
and that's one of my favorite things. I mean, I'm a sociology major, and I really enjoy kind of seeing national trends and like what's working in different markets and what different suppliers are talking about. And is it just me? Is it just San Francisco, or is it like is it a national thing?
Right.
Like how does it all kind of fit into a larger perspective of the wine industry? And nationally, I mean, wine sales are down. I mean, rosé sales were down. Like a lot of people are stuck with rosé, closing it out and stuff. There's great discounts to be had. That's over now, but 8-9 months ago, there were a lot of great discounts to be had. But wine sales, I think for most of our suppliers in every market have been down. I don't know what that means long term. Springboard, for our part, is we're trying to get a little more into spirits, which people love spirits. Cheers to mezcal.
Cheers. Oh, sorry, I just finished mine.
Fine,
yeah. I think diversifying the portfolio is kind of the answer, right? Like spirits, or like you mentioned before, you have some natural wines and you have some more classic wines, and maybe we all don't need to get into the beer game necessarily, but I mean, there could be something to be had there. Like the more tools in your tool belt, the more jobs you can get done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I'm with you. I hope that rosé really kind of like rebounds because I think that it's super important. I think it's historic, and I also think that it's just like a wine that makes sense. Not all the orange wines that I've had have been great.
Yeah.
70% I love, 30% not for me.
I would flip that for myself.
Okay.
But yeah.
Chillable red, let's say, I would say that like there's maybe less of a percentage that I really like. I'm really about like. There's some that fit the category, and you're like, cool, whatever. It loses a little bit of character, or whatever. But there's probably like 5% of rosés that I don't like. Most rosés pretty good, right? It's light, it's refreshing, it has high acidity, it's good minerality.
It should have those things.
Yeah. It doesn't always, but I think that's what I generally gravitate towards. And, being from a decade in Texas and originally from the deserts in Southern California, I like those things.
Yeah.
I like cold wines. I like,
but they drink a lot of Cabernet
fresh
in Texas, don't they?
Yeah, they do. I never did. I mean, I drank Cab, I guess, when I first got into wine, but, yeah, a lot of Cab. Heavy steaks.
Yeah.
Cab. Sweating. Humid as fuck, sweating in their polos, chugging 80-degree Napa Cab and eating a steak.
Yeah. Finish it off with a nice whiskey that's been aged for a long time.
That's what they do. Yeah. Usually, yeah. It's Scotch or give me that Blanton's, give me that Booker's, whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's just sweating the booze out in the middle of drinking it. Yeah. No, I mean, I won an Apple Watch forever ago. That's my pride and joy. I won an Apple Watch forever ago because I sold more rosé than anybody else in the rest of the state.
Wow, dude!
Yeah.
Wow, congratulations!
That was 2016, I think.
More than anybody in the state.
In the whole state.
You sold more rosé than anybody in the state of Texas.
Yep. So they gave me an Apple Watch. Yeah. That's it. I won. And then I retired and I bought a house on a beach and no.
And here you are. Yeah.
It did nothing. I had a watch for 3 years and it was great. Yeah, I really hope rosé comes back. I mean, I think it will. I think it's kind of the same thing that we're seeing with retail versus on-prem and the same thing we're seeing with natural wine. Like, I think there will eventually be just kind of like a natural stabilization that happens, and the market share kind of between the white wine and red wine has fallen in and gotten divided up. Whereas like rosé was there was no contender, and now there's two major contenders. I'm sure it'll stabilize.
Well, I can envision, you go to a wine bar, right? And it's like, white wine, maybe other, like rosé, chilled red, orange is like your three options, and then red wine. Like you have that kind of delineation. And I think a lot of wine bars haven't really, I don't know, they haven't really figured that out yet.
Right.
And I mean, just make it a separate category, just like different or something, like other, whatever you want to do, white, red, other, and you can put lots of things in there. And a lot of places still try and like lump orange wine in with rosé on a list or something, and like it just doesn't.
It's really hard to dance those lines, I mean, I remember a story that I always love is, I remember digging through John's list at Boulevard, and I remember just like, he had this page, and it was called like, I don't know, like New World Cabernet or California Cabernet or whatever it was, whatever the list said it was. And you'd scroll down the page and you'd look, and it was like Bokenhouse and Kloof chocolate block. And I would go like, hey, why isn't this on its own page? And he'd go, I'm not going to put one page for one wine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like a lot of people, I think, were trying to lump it in because it's just like, it's a pain in the ass to put like another header on your wine menu and say like, sparkling, white, rosé, orange, chilled red, dessert wines, Sherry's, all the
Yeah.
other shit.
Which everybody should drink more sherry, by the way.
Oh my God, that's one of my favorite things lately. I go to Ungrafted. They have all these cool sherries and vermouths and sake. I'm like, like I love wine. I love to drink a lot of wine.
Ungrafted.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I love to drink all of those things also. And then even when I go to like Golden Sardine, I always just get like a little glass of Amontillado or something.
Yeah.
Kind of, it's a good way to start. Then I just get really hungry. Cool. Well, we're getting to the point, and hopefully our camera doesn't die again. What some of the questions that we ask the most frequently, and maybe it'll be a little bit differently for you. The answer will be a little bit different because it's been a while since you've been in the hospitality industry, but you're still quite hospitable. What does hospitality mean to you?
I think that hospitality is, of course, anticipating the guest needs before your own if you're in a restaurant, and that can apply to a sales side too, right? Like I can see an account and be like, oh, you still have 2022 rosé. We are now in 2024. Perhaps you would like a 2023 bottle option. There are ways that kind of anticipating the guest needs or your client's needs can, kind of cover all of that. But I also think that hospitality is something that needs to be earned by the guest, and it's not just something that's an automatic given. And I guess my point is the customer's not always right.
Right.
The customer can be a total asshole, and it doesn't mean that you then have to be hospitable to them.
Right.
When you engage with someone, whether it's at a restaurant or a salesperson or whatever the interaction is, right, there's a mutual kind of trade of decorum and respect.
Right.
And if one person falters on that, then it doesn't matter if you should not feel obliged to then give that same respect that should be there in the first place.
Right.
So I think hospitality is something that's earned. It's a given when you enter a relationship, whether you're sitting at a table, like I'm sitting at a table right now, you have an asshole guest, well, then fuck them. You know? But it's a mutual interaction between two people for mutual respect, and decorum.
I like that. Mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good way to think about it too. It is a two-way street. It's not always about just like going up to the table and being a fucking punching bag, right? Like it's about like, like I'm here.
Yeah. You're here to have a good time. Let
you
me take
relax.
care of you.
Let me take care of you. Yeah.
Don't
trust
give
me
me
a little
hard
bit.
time. Yeah, exactly. You
If
got to relinquish a
don't
little
trust
bit of
me, you shouldn't be here because you're
100%.
here and I have a job to do. And if you don't want me to do my job, then you shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
I mean, all respect for people that come in and have a lot of shit going on and, need a few minutes to just breathe and a few minutes to decompress. But yeah, I'm with you. Like it's sometimes there's those guests. We all have those guests. Cool. Well, we revealed the wine. Do you have any final thoughts? Any advice? Any closing concepts that you'd like to get out into the world?
Just keep drinking and exploring. And for all the new people out there who aren't really familiar with the wine world, don't get stuck into drinking and tasting the same thing over and over. Try new stuff. You might not like it, but don't just keep reaching for that same bottle of Cabernet or Chardonnay that you're always reaching for. So try new stuff. Keep exploring. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. That's perfect. Break away from brand loyalty.
Yeah, there you go. Unless it's my
Don't
brands,
just
okay.
drink Prisoner.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking like Rambau
or
like
Rambau,
the Camus
yeah.
or like whatever. But yeah.
I wonder how long I can get away with this before I get a cease and desist. We'll see. Just a matter of time. All right, let's wrap it. Let's crush these last bottles and
Cheers.
have a good night. Cheers.
Cheers.